Immediately after any tragedy involving a firearm, we hear calls for more gun control, despite the fact that none of the proposed measures could ever have prevented or even mitigated that event. Now, some are swayed by the emotional argument, but each time we also see a myriad of seemingly logic-based anti-gun arguments. Now, these come in the form of studies and reports funded or conducted by anti-gun groups, and by tried and tired arguments that those of us who have been following for a while just roll our eyes at. But these can sway the uninitiated, and that's why I would like to discuss them now. Now, since the murders in Charleston, there have been so many of these false reports and arguments that I'm not going to be able to fit them in one video. So it'll be in several parts. Something we often hear in the wake of these tragedies is the purported success of gun control in Australia. This is something President Obama has brought up multiple times in his recent calls for gun control. A little background information. In 1996 in Port Arthur, Tasmania, Australia experienced its worst mass murder in recent history. The response was the swift restriction of nearly all repeating firearms and the mandatory buyback of affected guns. 15 years later, the politicians were declaring it success, saying that in the 15 years prior to the buyback, there had been 15 mass shootings, and none since. Now, that's a very bold claim, and the first thing we need to examine. Now, you notice they said mass shooting, not mass murder, and they carefully redefined that term to fit their needs. But there were, in fact, 15 mass murders in the 15 years prior to the gun buyback, the majority of which were family murder-suicides. And there were none since. Well, except for this one, and 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 these. The official source, government sources for crime data in Australia, is the Australian Bureau of Statistics and the Australian Institute of Criminology. As is often the case, if you look at official data, it tells a very different story than the politicians. Now, mass shootings, as they very carefully redefined it, have been reduced, but mass murder and murder-suicide continue to be a problem and remain a similar percentage of the overall murder rate. And what about the overall murder rate? Again, if you look at the official data, the case for gun control gets very hard to make. You see, immediately after the buyback, Australia saw a steep spike in their murder rate, followed by a slow decline. Now, gun control proponents will say this was just a delayed response, pointing out that over the last 20 years, Australia's crime rate has been reduced by 42%. And this is true. What they don't tell you is that over the exact same period, the U.S. murder rate has been reduced by 53%. That's right. The U.S. has done better than the country that gets held up as an example of the success of gun control. The U.S. murder rate has seen a larger decline than Australia. And what about other violent crimes? Well, the same 20 years that in the U.S. has seen violent crimes cut in half or better across the board, Australia has not seen a decline. Assaults are up. Rape and other violent crimes are flat. And notice also that the percentage of violent crimes committed with a gun has remained essentially unchanged, proving once again that gun control does not affect criminals. Australia is held up as an example of the success of gun control. But in reality, the U.S. has seen a bigger reduction in both murder and violent crime. The Australians gave up their rights for the illusion of security, and that's all they got, an illusion. Now, who would want to follow that example?